Okay, stop being so afraid. I know you might not even be conscious of how afraid you are about this whole global warming thing, but there's already a solution. I saw it on the Science Channel. In fact, there's lots of solutions, and there's no need to worry. This is not about all of a sudden we cannot breathe, the air is just, polluted to the point where we cannot breathe. There are parts of the world where you can experience that, in Mexico City, I believe, from what I've heard, but you can move from these parts and, find other work. But it's not, this global warming thing, gotta remember that the news is so much about fear. And it used to be a half hour in the evening, a little bit in the morning, half hour at noon, but now it's constantly. And so, in order to fill that much space, there has to be a lot of fear, a lot of things to be afraid of. And the thing with global warming is, you cannot just wake up one day and be eliminated by global warming. There is time to respond to it. The best solution that I have heard of, which I mentioned earlier on the Science Channel, was putting a bunch of lenses that shift the direction of the sun and diffuse it. This is like thousands or millions or whatever in space. And so here's Earth and here's the sun, and then between them, at a rate that would be rotating, at a consistent kind of pace. I shouldn't say rotating, but in the way satellites are in a static place in position to the Earth. These would be statically in relationship to the sun, and would diffuse the amount of light coming this way, the amount of heat, more importantly, and lower the temperature of the Earth by, I think they said 3 degrees or something like that, which would offset global warming. And it would take some effort and energy, but we're talking about making the Earth a more pleasant place. And I think that if you look at history, let's look from the American standpoint. Okay, we had World War I. Is the world going to end? Are we going to lose? They had the Depression. A lot of suicide and just people not being able to survive, and just the whole hopelessness for a long time. And then there was World War II. And then there was a little happy period, and then we got more into Cuban Missile Crisis, Bay of Pigs, fear of nuclear war, and there's a lot of environmental concerns coming up in the 70s, the Reagan era, Cold War fears, and we've been through this, this fear of our elimination over and over. And the ego loves that because it's like, this is my way of staying in power. If I can convince the mind, body, spirit of the individual that I inhabit that there's a lot to be afraid of, then they'll make choices out of ego. And I think this global warming thing, it's something that needs to be addressed and dealt with creatively and solution-oriented. But the fear is just so prevalent, that I think its purpose on a spiritual level is to trigger people, because when they're uncomfortable, like after 9/11 in America, a lot of people were very uncomfortable, we become more attuned and our stuff comes up and we can deal with it. But don't be dominated by the fear to the point where you become hopeless, because if you're hopeless, then your choices will be more addictive and low vibrational and just fear-based and desperate, grasping desperately and clinging to different things that will make you feel better, or different, compulsive choices and so forth, and there's no need for that. This is largely about recognizing our connection between how do we view the world and how does the world manifest itself. And if we are very afraid and we see ourselves as limited, then we're going to fear our death, our personal sense of mortality, and project that onto the world, and the world is going to get us. Looking at the world as a place that's going to get us. But I recommend reading, go to ROPI.org, ropey.net, ropey.net, and read my excerpts from Reflections on Physical Immortality. It is a perspective that is not so much about squeezing in experience before you dwindle down to your death. It's about staying healthy. If you want to understand the concepts behind it, read it, check it out. I went through a death-type experience during the Reagan era, around, let's say, 84-ish, and what happened was that I lived near Midland, Michigan, in a small town called Auburn, and I had found out that Dow Chemical was supposedly a secondary target if there were to be a nuclear war with Russia. And so these missiles, you know, in my mind, would come so close that it would just blast the whole area and so forth if there was a war. And I would hear airplanes, because there was also, you know, the Tri-City Airport or whatever nearby, and I would think, is that a missile? So often throughout, you know, this time period in high school, I would just lay there and I would wait, and as the plane got further away, I would just wait to see would there be silence or would there be a blast. And so one of the things that I would do if I was paranoid, if there was a particularly low plane or just, you know, whatever fears were going on for me, I'd reach behind me, turn on my clock radio to the radio, and it's like, okay, if there's no warnings or anything, everything's fine. So I don't know how many times I checked that radio. Could be over 100, I don't know. Could be hundreds, maybe, I don't know. But one time, I went to do that at night, and it was on the weekend. My sister had a friend over, they were sleeping in the basement, and I checked it, and then there was nothing there, it was static. And I kept turning the tuner, trying to find some station. There was nothing but static. And eventually I found this song. It was about radiation. I don't know if it's Robert Palmer or whatever, but an old song about things aren't what they used to be, radiation in the air, and it felt like a swan song. It felt like the radio station knew this was it. This was a nuclear attack, and this was the last song that we're going to play, and it was just, you know, sad and depressed. And I just laid there. I'm like, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. Talk about attracting what you fear. And so I thought, do I just lay here and wait for the blast? And then I thought, no. My sister and her friend might survive the initial blast being in the basement. Don't want them to be alone. And so I got up and I woke up my mom and I told her there was a nuclear attack. And she's like, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, it's true, check your radio. And she's like, Chris, what are you doing? And so, so that must have been pretty disorienting for her. But she turned on her radio, and then everything, it was normal, because I found out later, I had switched mine in my reaching back, I had switched mine to AM, and that's why I got so much static. There weren't as many AM stations or whatever, and the one that I got was playing this older song, Synchronicity, but it was like a death experience. I felt like I had resigned myself to death, and that even if we weren't going to be killed right away, the radiation would kill us. And there are rituals like that in some cultures where you go through an experience of dying to this world, and then afterwards, in my case, I feel more alive and indestructible. I've already died. I know how that feels. I know how it feels to just resign myself to death. Now it's time to resign myself to life, which is why I think that all of us should focus less on being afraid of global warming.